Hey guys, Jay here and welcome to another cosplay tutorial. Today we're going to be working on the Fenrir Keyblade from Kingdom Hearts 2. So just like my more recent tutorials, this is going to be in that style of voiceover where you can see what I'm doing and then I just put my voice over everything. I found that style to be much easier to do, so I'm just going to do that from now on. Anyway, let's get to the build of Fenrir. To start out, I used a metal version that you can buy on eBay that I already had to pattern out the blade and the top of the handguard. I traced the top of the handguard on 1/2-inch EVA floor mat 5 times, with 2 of them being reversed. I then cut the blade pattern into 3 sections, and I traced out 2 on 1 sheet of foam, where one side is larger with 2 pieces put together, and the third piece is just the third section of the blade. And I can only fit 2 full blades on 1 sheet, so I have to also do this on half of another sheet. The reason I'm doing this is because the blade won't fit on 1 sheet altogether. So where the 2 pieces of 1 blade meet together, I'm alternating between 3 different pieces. These are my first and second piece. You can see where I wrote 1 and 2, where 2 the cut is higher and 1 the cut is lower. 3 matches 1, and then 2 is the center one. I then start to rough out the idea for the chain links, because they don't actually exist in real life. They're kind of like chain links with little thorns on them, but instead, to make it easier, I just make them into 6-sided shapes. Once I get the final design for each link, I cut that out and then trace it 6 times onto 2mm EVA foam. I folded a long piece of wire over on itself and twisted it up and then bent it into the shape of each of the links. I'm going to sandwich this in between 2 cutouts of that same shape. That way it'll give it a lot of strength and stability. I do the exact same thing with the clasp. Then I carefully paint them with a dark gray paint called dark granite. And while things dry, I can work on multiple pieces. So I tape the blade template back together, find the center, make marks on either side that are 1/4 inch from the center. I then cut the whole middle section out because this is where I'm going to be putting the core. I then transfer it and cut it out of the blade that I marked number 2. Originally I was going to use a PVC pipe, but it's way too large, so I got a 1/2-inch dowel instead. Then I contact the middle and one of the outer sides of the blade and weigh it down with some heavy items. I do that same center thing with the top of the handguard, except this time it's the size of the pipe, which is about 1 inch in diameter. I then use this same cut up piece to mark on the foam that's going to be on either side of it, because I have to gouge out with the Dremel to make room for the pipe to fit. And then I contact cement that together as well. Now that the chain pieces have dried on all sides, this is way later, like the next day, I use 2 small chain links to connect everything together. I also ended up making 3 more chain links because 3 wasn't enough, so I have 6 in total, and each of them are separated by 2 pieces of chain. When I started sticking the top pieces of the handguard together, I forgot to cut out where the sides of the handguard are going to go, so I do this now. And then I do the exact same thing I did with the center of it. To make the raised detail on either side of the handguard, I draw right onto the template and kind of freehand it. I also found out that the cap to acrylic paints was the exact size I needed for all of the circle pieces, including the materia slots. I then take my Dremel and just go haywire on the outside to make everything flat, or as flat as possible. It's not that great, but it'll be better than nothing. Then I contact cement all of the faceplates. And now I can do some test fitting, and I find out now that the side of the handguards are a little too close and I need to gouge it back out a little bit more. I then take a straight edge and mark where the bevels on the blade are going to go. Using an extremely sharp knife and being very careful, if you cut at an angle, you can get most of this off without having to worry about taking too much time on the Dremel or overheating your Dremel. This could technically also be done on a belt sander, but the pieces are kind of far apart and I don't want to gouge anything. I go over it with a sanding block, but it really doesn't do much other than take some of the burrs off. I mark all the panel lines to make it look more like a key and then paint it. The only gray that I could find in the right color was model paint, so that's what I'm using. And it does get in the panel lines, and I forgot to film it, but I used the back of a really small paintbrush to take the paint out of the panel lines, and it also opened the panel lines a lot more, which is what I wanted. I then make the butt plate, or whatever you want to call that, the bottom piece that the chain attaches to. I make it the exact same way that I made pretty much everything else. Also, this is 5 layers of foam, and so is the handguard. I don't know if I mentioned that specifically. This bottom piece, I want to add a flat surface all the way around, so I measure how wide it needs to be and glue it down. Then I cut a trapezoid shape and glue it in the little gap. And yes, this piece is supposed to be a different color. That's why I made it a separate piece. To make the side pull things on the handguard, I cut PVC the right length, with one side being flat and one side being angled, and I really can't give you the angle because I don't remember what it was. But it's steeper than 45 degrees. That's all I know. I cut out some rectangles where the width of it would fit around the pipe, and then contact cemented everything together. And I rolled it to make it fit better. And then I cut off the ends. I also had to cut out some panel lines in this foam, and I didn't do too well. They're kind of angled weird. They were almost at a 45-degree angle from the pipe, so it was almost near impossible for me to get them straight. If you can find a way to do that, yeah, go ahead and do whatever you need to. Then to make the little raised piece that's on the bottom of it that connects to the butt plate. I layered 3 different pieces of foam that are all different sizes. You can kind of just see how I did it, just kind of match what I did. It's a little hard to explain. You can kind of just see and just eyeball it. I didn't do any measuring for this part. Then I cut another piece that was a little bit bigger than all of that so that it could be tapered on top and a little bit on bottom. Then all of the area that was just one layer of foam I painted purple. While the purple paint dried, I painted the entirety of the upper and lower parts of the handguard with that same dark granite. After the purple dried, I was able to make the rest of it black. Then I added whatever that connector piece is that's always in between a handle and the crossguard. The next day I realized that I didn't have the little side prongs that come out, whatever those are called. Luckily, we had cardboard tubing from a package of aluminum foil that was empty. Because it's easy to cut, I just used that. I basically did the exact same thing I did with the side pulls and wrapped them in foam. This time I left a little bit uncovered because that's going to get glued into a slot, and that'll just make it easier to hold onto. To make the top have this weird taper thing that it does, it just so happens that the cap to the model glue is the exact same size that I need. So I indented into the foam, cut it out, and then very carefully use a Dremel to taper the top. I then cut in all of the panel lines. I also glued a cap to the end by just pressing it against some foam with contact cement on it and then cutting it out. And then I glued these tapered pieces onto the cap. I then mark where they need to go and then very carefully cut about 1 centimeter into the foam all the way around. I then paint those also dark granite. Now that the handguard pieces are dry, I can take the bottom piece and cover everything except for the front and back plates with that same light gray that I used on the blade. At this time I can also tape off the left and right sides of the panels on the top of the handguard and paint them the same exact color. I then tape off and paint black inside the panel lines of the little side pieces, whatever they're called. Upon removing the tape though, it removed a lot of the paint, so I had to repaint it. I then used a red that was the same model paint as the light gray to color the handle. What I should have done was used red hockey tape and spiraled it down the handle, but I would have had to do that before I put the gray pieces on. Oh yeah, I also put a second gray piece on. And once that's dry, I can now use Gorilla Glue in the bottom piece and shove it over the handle, and then I used the screen from my camera to do my testing to make sure everything was straight. Then I used that same clear Gorilla Glue in the holes for the side poles, as well as put it on the side of the bottom piece to glue the side poles into place. The black part of it does attach to the bottom piece. Since I had to make the holes bigger, I filled what was left over in the hole with hot glue. I also made the piece that's going to be connected to the bottom that looks like the latch is connected to it for the chain. Now I need to work on the blade. It has this weird bandage, so I got this ace bandage from Walmart, and then I cut it in half lengthwise. And originally I had cut it into just 2 pieces that were wider, where it was half the length, but that wasn't long enough. So when I cut it in half down the length, I needed to put the 2 pieces back together so that it was the full length again. Otherwise, there wasn't going to be enough. I then used hot glue and pins to put everything into place. None of these are going to actually hold very well, but these will hold for now while I figure it out. Once I get that good and done, before I do the very last bit, I have to cover the dowel in some tape because it's not big enough to just fit in the PVC pipe. So I make 2 thick sections of tape. After test fitting and making sure that it fits snugly, I use normal Gorilla Glue, the kind that foams up, in between both of the pieces of tape on the pole and inside the pipe. This way, when it foams up, it won't seep out anywhere. The tape will hold it in place. Then I contact cement the bottom of the blade to the top of the handguard. That way it can't spin around while it's trying to dry. And then I use Mod Podge all over the bandages, and this will do 3 things. Harden the bandages so they're not soft anymore, stop them from fraying, and glue them down to the blade. All things that I want it to do. Also, to make it stay on the bottom near the handguard, I just tied it off on one side. I decided for strength to add 2 more pieces to the sides of where the clasp goes. The actual Keyblade kind of looks like that anyway. I then have to cut into the paint because I forgot that it's not going to glue together if there's nothing for it to hold on to. So cutting into it will give the contact cement somewhere to go and grab onto. And then I put the 2 pieces together. And just for security, I use super glue around the perimeter. And once that dries, the Keyblade is complete.
Give in to the dark.
Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. This was actually a Keyblade that I've been meaning to make for years now. Ever since I started cosplaying in 2011, well, when I started making stuff, I wanted to make Fenrir, and I only just now got around to it. I do have a metal version that you saw in the tutorial, but it's not accurate, and I don't like it. It's also super heavy, like 15-20 pounds, because it's solid steel, and it's not allowed in conventions because it's solid steel. So now that I'm a little bit more comfortable with the style of build that I did with this one, which is very similar to my Sword Art Online scimitar and my Jason Voorhees machete. But now that I've done a few builds in that style, I'm a lot more comfortable with it, and I think that's how most of my builds are going to go from now on for medium to semi-large size swords. So that's going to be it for this video. If you'd like to go ahead and give it that thumbs up. If you want to see more tutorials, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that you'll be notified every time I upload. And with that, I'll see you guys later.